What's up, everyone? Vylocity here with Pitchfork Academy, and I'm back with another Unreal Engine 5 material tutorial. In today's video, we'll be learning how to create this really cool hologram material, complete with scan lines and a really unique glitch effect. Without further ado, let me show you how to make this. Alright, to get started, I'll just go ahead and create a new folder called Materials, since I don't have one in this project yet, and then I'll double click to open that up, and then right click and new material, and I'll call this m_hologram. Pretty straightforward. And then once I open this up, we can take a look at the details panel on the left, and we want to change the blend mode from opaque to translucent and the shading model from default lit to unlit, because it's not going to need to receive any light or reflections or any of that. It's just going to emit light with the emissive color. And from here, we can hold 3 and click to get a constant color, and I'll actually right click and convert it to a parameter. And I'll call this color inner. And then I'll duplicate this and call this one color outer, because we want to be able to control the color at the center of our material versus the outer and have a nice fade between them. I'll double click on the color inner and just set it to be red, and then I'll double click on the color outer and set it to be sort of a yellowish orange like that. And then we want to hold S and click for a scalar, and I'll call this color inner and default value of 1. And then I'll duplicate this for color outer and a default value of 100. We want the outer edge to be very bright, so we'll multiply that by the original colors. So I'll hold M and click to get a multiply, and then I'll plug that up like this. I'll duplicate this multiply, and I'll do the same thing here. And then I'll sort of drag these back, get some space. And then we want to hold L and click for lerp. This will let us blend between the inner color versus the outer color based on whatever we plug into this alpha. And that's going to be a Fresnel node. So if I get a Fresnel, and just so we can see what this does, I'll drag this into emissive color. You can see right away that the outer edge of this material sphere is now much brighter than the center. And that's kind of to show you that wherever this Fresnel is a lower value, we'll get more of whatever's the A input. And wherever the value is brighter, for example, the edge where it's nice and white, we'll get more of the B input. So we'll add some more parameters to control this and sort of be able to define how sharp the transition is. And to do that, we'll get a scalar parameter and call it color Fresnel with a default value of 1. And this needs to go into the exponent. And then from here, we'll get a power node, and we'll leave the default value of 2. We just want to sharpen it up a little bit, and so it's different from the opacity one that we'll create later. From here, we want to get a multiply. And we won't plug anything into this yet. This will be our scan line effect. And then from here, we'll saturate this. And this just is a fancy term for keeping the value between 0 and 1, so it doesn't have any sort of glitchy look to it or any incorrect values coming through. From here, we want to get a divide node. And this sounds a little bit crazy, but we're going to divide by the eye adaptation, which is sort of the auto exposure in the scene. And basically, this really helps with lumen, so the light from the emissive material doesn't overexpose the scene too much. You'll still see a little bit of the brightness on the ground, but it won't be as exaggerated. And you can kind of see the effect here, but it'll look much better once we get the other controls in. So now we should be good to go ahead and highlight all of this, and we'll click C, and we'll name this section color. And then we do need to go in and highlight all of the parameters. So I'll hold Control and select all 5 of these parameters. And then in the group on the left, we'll call this color. And I'll just sort of clean this up a bit. Oh. All right, from here, we can go ahead and do the opacity. So I'll go down a bit and I'll hold S for a scalar. We'll call this opacity inner. And this will be a default value of 0.5. I'll duplicate this. Opacity outer for this one and default value of 10. And I'll get another lerp by holding L, and then we'll lerp between the inner and the outer. based on another Fresnel. So I'll copy this, plug this in here, and then I'll just copy one of these opacity parameters. And this will be called opacity Fresnel, and we need to change the default value to 1. Again, any default values I put in here, I encourage you to mess around with to see if you can get a look that better suits your project. And then I'll get another multiply. And then we'll multiply this by the dither temporal AA node, which will help us get sort of a cool, glitchy look to our material. And you don't necessarily have to use this, and that's why we'll have a parameter called dither threshold. We'll have it on by default at 0.5. I think it does look good with a little bit of dithering. And this goes into alpha threshold, by the way. We'll leave random alone. You can mess around with this if you like, but I'll just leave it blank. And then from here, we can go ahead and plug this into opacity. But we also want to plug it into opacity mask in case later we decide that we want to change our shading model from translucent to masked, which is definitely cheaper. And I'll show that in the shading complexity mode a little bit later. But it won't look as clean, but it will still allow you to use translucency sort of in a material that isn't actually translucent, if that makes any sense. And I'll showcase that in a bit. Now we can highlight all of these green nodes here, and we'll put it into a group called opacity. And then we can highlight everything here and click C, and we'll call this whole thing the opacity group. All right, next we'll work on the scan line effect, and those will be the lines that you see sort of panning down on the material, and that'll plug into our multiply here once we have that. And what I want to do is sort of go over to the left so we have some more space, and I'll zoom in, right click, and search for screen aligned UVs. And these will be the UVs of the screen themselves. So when we use this as our texture coordinates, no matter what distance we are from the material, the lines will remain the same size and the same orientation, which gives it sort of a cool sci-fi look. And you can mess around with this if you want. Maybe you don't want this kind of look, but this, I think, in my opinion, looks pretty cool. So off of here, this XY 100%, we can search for panner. And this allows us to move the UVs in a certain direction. And you'll see that the speed expects one input, but there's two values here. So we need to get an append vector, which will allow us to input two vectors here into one. And I'll hold 1 and click for a constant value of 0. And we'll just plug that in because for the X left and right value, we don't want it to actually move that direction. We only want to be able to change it on the Y direction, up and down. So I'll get a parameter and I'll call it macro scanline, speed. And by default, I want it to go downward, so I'll have it be negative 0.1, which should be pretty slow, but not too slow. And we'll plug that in like that. And then from here, off the panner, we'll search for a linear gradient, like this. And then we want the vertical gradient, so the V gradient, and we want to multiply by a parameter called macro scanline amount. This allows us to control how many of the lines we see, and 2 is a pretty decent number for that. It's not too many lines. We'll have much more of the micro scan lines, hence the word macro here. These are sort of the bigger lines. And then from here, we want to drag off and search for frac. And this is an interesting node. Basically, it takes the input and it cuts it off based off the actual decimal points of the incoming information. So as you can see here, it creates this really cool gradient effect. And once we see it on the material, this will be panning downwards and it kind of creates that cool effect. From this, we want to actually multiply it by itself, which will make it a little bit more soft and realistic looking. And then from here, we'll drag off and search for clamp. And we just want to clamp this between 0.5 and 1. So the range isn't so big. It's just a range between 0.5 and 1. All right, so these are our macro scan lines. And we can go ahead and highlight macro scan line amount and speed. And we'll put it into a group called scanline. And now we should be good to copy all of this and paste it. And the first thing that we need to do is change anywhere that it says macro to micro. You could have your own naming convention for these. You could have it literally be small and big lines. I just like to use these terms. And then we need to also change this frac node. I'm going to instead use assign, which will make it to where the gradient isn't sharp on one edge. It'll actually be, um, I wish we could see the preview. I don't know why it's not working. But basically, it'll look like a gradient on both sides and won't have a sharp edge like that one does. And the default values for the micro scanline amount can be negative 0.05. So I'll also have them going downwards. And then the micro scanline amount I'll set to 70. So a lot more lines with that. From here, we want to multiply these together. And then we're also going to get the dot product. This is where it gets a little bit confusing, but bear with me. We want the dot product of the macro scan lines and then of between the macro scan lines and the micro scan lines combined. This just gives it a little bit more interesting of effect when combining them. And then from here, we finally want to plug this into the multiply right here, not the power. We want to leave the power blank, and then we'll just plug that into the multiply. And I'll just highlight the top of these nodes here and click Q so they line up a little bit better. And now we can highlight all of this stuff, click C, and we'll call this scan lines. All right, now we can really start to see the scanline effect coming into play and that dithering sort of noisy look that of course can be adjusted. So if you don't like the noisy look there, that's going to be this dither threshold, and we'll adjust that later in the material instance. But we do have the scan lines going, and we're good to move on to the glitch effect. So I'll just sort of go down below the scan lines here, and I'll right click and search for a node called vertex normal world space. And then from here, we want to drag off and search for component mask. And we only want the R channel for this top one. And then I'll duplicate this and we'll get the G channel. We basically want each individual channel. And then I'll duplicate it down here so we have some more space to work. And then I'll put that into the B channel. So we have R, G, and B. And that's basically the different directions of the mesh. So we have forward, backwards, left, right, up, and down. And basically, over time, we're going to switch between glitching the mesh forward and backwards, left and right, and then up and down. And this is sort of a unique custom effect I came up with. There's probably different ways to do this, but I think it looks great. So we'll continue with this, and then I'll drag off of here and search for lerp. We want to lerp between the R and the G. And we'll do this based on time. So I'll right click and search for time. This is basically time as it runs throughout your game, and we're going to multiply it so we can change the speed of it in the material. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky, but I'll kind of explain as I go along. We'll get a parameter called direction timing A or something like that, and we'll make this default value of 0.3. Whoops. And then from here, we'll get a frac. And the reason we want to get a frac is because basically this gets only the decimal points of the value. So for example, as time goes on, you will get into, for example, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, but then you'll also have the point like 3, 5, 7, whatever after that. And we're really only interested in what happens after the decimal point. We just want time to loop over and over. And basically, since the lerp takes a value between 0 and 1, we want to basically switch between the R and the G over time, but only between the 0 and the 1. And we want to have two different versions of this at different speeds. So I'll duplicate this and I'll change it to direction timing B. And this value will be 0.1. And then I'll duplicate this lerp and plug the B into A, the frac here into the alpha, and this lerp into A. So basically what's happening is based on this timing of the 0.3 speed, we're lerping between R and G. And then at this speed of 0.1, I guess we could actually do this a little bit higher than that one. So we'll do 0.5 for this. And then at this speed, we're going to lerp between these two values, R and G, and the B, which is the up and down of the mesh. So this gives us all the different directions over time, and it should never really line up because they're different values and whatnot. So we'll kind of go with that, and we can adjust these later as needed. So now we can highlight direction timing B and A, and we'll put it into a group called glitch. Now I'll just highlight all of this stuff, click C, and we'll call this glitch, glitch direction. Just like that. And then I'll leave that like that for now. We won't plug it into anything. And now we'll do some more logic for the different timings for how intense the glitch is. So this is the direction that we're going to change randomly. And then we also want to randomly change the intensity. So to do that, we'll search for time again, and we'll get a multiply and a scalar, and we'll call this glitch timing A. We'll do a value of 1. And then from here, we want to get a frac because we don't want time to go infinitely. We want it to keep repeating. As soon as it hits 1, it goes back to 0.001 and up, up, up until it hits 1 again. Then it keeps repeating that. And then from here, we want to get an if node. Zoom in a little bit here. So we'll plug the frac into A, and then I'll hold 1 and click to get a single value, and I'll make this 0.1, and then I'll duplicate this and set this one to 0. And then I'll plug this into B and this into A. And then I'll get another parameter, and we'll call this glitch intensity. Keep misspelling things. There we go. And default value can be 25. And this goes into A equals B and A is less than B. So basically, as time goes on, if the time, like, because it's going to repeat after every second, if the time is less than 0.1 or equal to it, it will basically do the glitch amount. And if it's greater than that, it won't glitch. So this makes it to where the glitch kind of comes in randomly because we're going to have two versions of this, one with the timing of 1, and then we'll duplicate all of this. And we'll do this a similar way. So we'll do glitch timing B, but we'll change the value to 0.45. I don't want to do 0.5 because then it'll just sort of line up with the first one. So this way it's a little bit different. And over time we get different results. And we'll keep the same glitch intensity. And then we want to lerp between these two glitch timings. So that way sometimes it might glitch twice in a row really quick, and then sometimes it might pause for a second and then glitch again. And then it'll use this intensity amount like that. And we want to search for time once more and get a multiply. And I'll copy one of these fracs over. Probably could have copied the whole thing, but that's all right. And then we need another parameter. And this will be called glitch time switch. Really couldn't think of a better name for this, but that will do. And we'll set this to be maybe a value of like 0.525, something like that. This really doesn't matter. As long as it's different from these two and not too fast, not too slow, this should work out just fine. And we'll plug this into here. So now over this time period at this speed, it will switch between using this glitch timing and this glitch timing. And naturally, it will use a value between 1 and 25. So sometimes we'll get the full 25 strength, and sometimes we might get a strength of like 7 or 21, for example. And all right, once we have all of that, we can highlight all of these parameters, so these 4, and we'll put it into that glitch group. And then we can highlight all of this and click C, and we'll call this glitch timing, something like that. And I'll drag this up to match. And then from here, we can get a multiply node and another multiply node. And we want to multiply this here that we'd made earlier, this direction timing, with the scan line effect here, but this bottom one, like this. So this is the macro, or sorry, the micro scan lines, because we want the micro scan lines, like these really small lines, to be driving sort of the effect. The compression probably won't show these lines, but we'll see it on the character. Um, and so yeah, we want to multiply this bottom clamp node with the glitch timing, and then we'll multiply this with the bottom lerp. And then this all goes into the world position offset. This will actually offset the vertices of the mesh and create this glitching effect. As you can see here, it's kind of glitching in different directions at different amounts, and that's working as intended. All right, now we're good to save, and I'll close out of this, and then let's make a material instance of this. So I'll right click, convert to material instance, and I'll call this mi underscore hologram underscore red. Actually, I'll do orange. Kind of looks mostly orange. And now we need a mesh to put this on. So I'll just go ahead and get the default mannequin. So I'll go to characters, mannequins, animations, and I'll use Quinn. And I'll drag out the MF idle like so. And then I'll go back to my materials. And now I should be good to put this on there. And as you can see, we get this cool holographic or hologram glitch effect. And the glitch is pretty intense now, and this might be what you're going for. But what I'll do is I'll open up this material instance and look at some of these parameters. All right, first off, you can see we could change the color and all that. We'll do that in a minute. But the glitch intensity, for example, if we set this to 0, we don't get any glitch effect. It's just nice and calm. But as soon as we start adding numbers in, for example, there's a value of 5, and you kind of get the idea there. If you crank this up too much, you'll get some really wild effect there, as you can see. So I'll keep it at 5 for now, and we can continue looking at some of the parameters. So I'll go ahead and turn on everything here. Obviously, we can change the color to be whatever we desire, and I'll make some instances, some extra instances in a minute, and we'll kind of compare them. So the Fresnel, the color Fresnel, controls where that sort of difference starts between the two different colors. So depending on what you're going for, you can really sort of tighten up that contrast there or leave it at 1. I might do a value of 2 for this one. And then the color outer intensity, you can see if I set this back to 1, it kind of loses the contrast. So 100 is pretty bright, but you could do, for example, 10 or 25. Really just depends on your project. The glitch timings and all that, it's really hard to see the difference when you change these, but you can try to, for example, change some of them and things will happen slower or faster. Yeah, so I increase this glitch timing A, and you can see now it's kind of freaking out a bit. If I lower it to 0.1, we might hardly ever see the glitch. Yeah. So 1 is a decent amount for that. Then we can keep going down to the opacity, and the dithering is one thing that I wanted to showcase. So a value of 0 really makes it dither, and it kind of gets this interesting noisy pattern. If I set it to 1, there will be no dithering, and it will just use the opacity values that you have set here. So if I drag, for example, opacity inner to the left, you can see now we have basically an entirely translucent front look, and then the edge is solid. And as you can see, you can really mess with these values to get some different looks. I think you can even have it be, yeah, like this, where it's sort of soft on the outside, but has the holographic look on the inner. And then the opacity Fresnel just controls that amount of fade. So you can get this sort of look here. And then if you were to change your color Fresnel, you could bring back in the color. So it's just on the edge. And you get this really interesting reddish orange highlighted effect. I'm going to go ahead and revert those changes to how I had it. And we'll continue going down. The macro scan line amount is going to be, see this line here, it's kind of these really slow ones. If I set it to, for example, 5 or 10, you can see what that does. It's the overall bigger line that comes down. I like a value of 2. Oh, whoops, that's the wrong one. Put that back to 2. And then the speed is obviously how fast or slow the scan line goes. And if you put a positive value, the lines will go upwards. It's really up to you how you want it to look. And then the micro scan line amount, I'll set, for example, from 70 to 30 or 20. And now you can really see the effect that is happening there. And then you can also change the speed of those, probably too fast, to whatever it is that you're going for. I might change my micro scan line amount to 50 or 40, so it's a bit more obvious that they're there. And then what I can do now is I'll browse to this material instance. And what I like to do is once I have a nice base of a material instance that has good settings, instead of duplicating it, I'll actually create a material instance, and then I'll call this one blue. And then when I open up this one, the parent of this material instance will be my previous material instance. So I'll drag that back here. So now you can see the parent is the MI hologram orange. And if I go to the orange one, I can control things that are in here as long as I don't turn on these checkboxes. So now what I'll do is only check on the color, and I'll set the color inner to maybe like a purplish pink, and then the color outer to the blue. And then I'll drag on this to here. And obviously it's not just blue, it's sort of blue and purple, but you get the idea. Now you can get some really cool different results with that. And I might do that once more, but I won't create another instance. Now is when I would just want to duplicate. And I might make one called green. And then we'll drag this on here. Open this up. And we'll change the inner color to be maybe like a warmish yellow, and then the outer we'll do like a bright green. Maybe a little bit more green on the inner. And yeah, that's kind of how you would go about making different instances. And if I go back to the hologram orange, this is the master instance. I want to showcase really quickly the difference between the types of translucency. So real quick, if I go from lit up here on the top left and I go to optimization, view modes, and shader complexity, you can see that this is not the cheapest material. As you can see, it's in the red and pink, and when they overlap, it gets even worse. But usually this isn't that much of a problem, especially if you're making games for PC or high-end consoles. But if you're making a mobile game or a game for the Switch or something like that, you might not want to use real translucency. So what you can do is at the bottom, you can go to blend mode and change translucent to masked. And right away, you'll see that the material goes right back to being green, and you'll see this dotty pattern, and that's the dithering. So once I go back to lit mode, you can see that the characters are still translucent. Like, for example, I can still see through this character to the boxes over here, but it isn't as expensive. And it doesn't look necessarily as good, or maybe it's just a personal preference, but it still definitely does the job. And I think it looks just fine for what it is. And now we could go ahead and mess around a little bit with the opacity. So you can see here, this is a masked material, but we're getting this nice translucent effect still. And we could probably get a softer transition. If I set the outer opacity to maybe 1 and the inner to 0.25, or maybe 0.5 was fine. And then if we go to the dither threshold, you can see kind of how that works. If I set it to 1, it'll be very sharp and not very translucent, but 0.5 or 0.6, 0.7, something along those lines still allows you to see through to what's behind the material. But for this case, I will switch it back to translucent, and I'll revert these here. And then the last thing that I want to show is putting this material on a character that you can actually run around as. So what I'll do is I'll go to content, characters, third person blueprints. All right, once we're inside the third person character or your character, you'll want to go to your mesh, And then basically we just want to switch out the materials here to see how it looks. So I'll go to my content browser, find the materials, and I'll drag in this orange one here and compile, save. I'll go full screen and play. And now you can see this character in all its glory. But you'll notice as I sort of go left and right, there's this crazy ghosting effect. And one way to mitigate that is to go into a post-process volume. If you don't have a post-process volume, just click this little cube with the plus and go to volumes and then find post-process volume and then search for um, extent and then check infinite extent unbound so it covers your whole scene. But anyway, we want to search inside there for motion blur. And default is 0.5, but if we set this to 0.1, we still get the nice effect of the smooth screen while we turn a camera. But if we look around the character, the effect is not as intense with the smearing. So it's just one way to sort of lower the effect of that. And one last thing I want to do is, because that looks great and all, but what if we want to keep the original materials of our character, but have the effect of this applied on top of that? Well, we can do that by going back to our character, and we can clear the hologram materials there. And then in the details panel on the mesh, we'll search for overlay, and we just want to put one of these materials in the overlay slot instead. So for example, if I put this green one there and then compile, go to play, you can see that the original material is still under there. Now it will kind of glitch in and out because the mesh is, or the material is kind of moving the vertices around, and sometimes it goes within the character. But this is kind of a cool effect anyway, and you could always turn that effect down. For example, if I go into the hologram orange, our master here, and I turn the glitch intensity to 1 or even 0, if we choose not to have the glitch, then you can see that we just get a nice hologram effect over our character's material. And to be honest, it would probably look better with a softer color. So if I just switch this to maybe the orange one, and then we'll check to see how that looks. Yeah, now we can see more of the material underneath quite a bit easier. All right, that's going to do it for today's tutorial on hologram materials in Unreal Engine 5. If you guys learned absolutely anything at all, it would mean a lot to us if you left a like and subscribe to our channel, as it greatly helps us out and lets us know that you want to see more tutorials like this one. If you have any questions or suggestions about future material tutorials, make sure to leave a comment down below and let us know what you'd like to see. And this has been Vylocity with Pitchfork Academy, and I'll see you in the next one.